Nostalgia as a concept fascinates me. Even though I know the glasses are rose-tinted, it's still fun to put them on and remember, to let my mind take me back to places I can never return to. Companies know this. As certain beloved pieces of media pass their 20th birthday or so, it's another excuse to trot it out and ask an audience of former kids to remember, and maybe buy it again. A few months before the 20th anniversary of its original release, Nintendo published a new shiny remake of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. It's a game that hadn't officially been available since the Gamecube days. It's one of those titles that's developed something of a cult following. Well, as close to a cult following something can get when it has Mario in the title. Nintendo, of course, is no stranger to dropping new versions of their games, but there's something about this game in particular. Just look at all the reactions to the first trailer for it. This is a special game for many people. But I would argue that the love for the Thousand-Year Door goes deeper than mere nostalgia. People are nostalgic for the game, sure, but the game itself is all about nostalgia. It's a game that not only taps into, but also takes complete advantage of the audience's memories. It's a game that makes its own rose-tinted glasses. All games, to some extent or another, simulate an experience. What would it feel like to explore a hostile environment, or overcome a deep-rooted anxiety, or design an island paradise? Games have the power to deliver these experiences, to make the player imagine what it would feel like in these scenarios. The Thousand-Year Door simulates a different, more grounded experience. It simulates going to the local library and rummaging through the books, picking 8 of them at random. The game is a linear turn-based RPG that takes place over 8 chapters, each one being relatively self-contained. Mario will return to the same hub world, the seedy town of Rogueport, but then scamper off to a new environment with new characters, each pulling from different reference points. The story, while it does have threads that tie the whole thing together, is made up of a collection of short stories. But instead of simply switching locales, the Thousand-Year Door switches literary genres. While the core gameplay remains consistent throughout, the framing around its overworld exploration and battle system shift from story to story. And while it references common literary touchstones, it takes care to tell an original and oftentimes irreverent story within these established frameworks. Take the opening chapter, Castle and Dragon. Aesthetically, it fits the usual Mario World 1 mold, complete with the bright primary colors and recognizable enemies. Story-wise, it's literally the hero's journey, complete with a fantasy coat of paint. There's a call to adventure, supernatural aid, a threshold, tests, an ordeal, a reward, and a return to the changed world. There are secret magical stones, a menacing fortress, a fierce dragon. It's about as by the numbers as one can get. But this chapter is filled with wonderful subversions. This chapter also contains an impromptu quiz show, a bittersweet case of mistaken identity, a curse that backfires, and a dragon that once got food poisoning, and wants us to smell her feet? What? This is what the Thousand-Year Door excels at. It reminds the audience of a story they may have heard before. It doesn't reference a specific story about castles and dragons and reluctant heroes, but it instead assumes the player is familiar with that kind of story. It pushes the player toward a certain nostalgia, a memory of a story they might have once heard. Then it builds on top of that memory, creating a new story filled with wonder and snark. Each chapter is like this to some extent. The second chapter introduces a new, mysterious yet quiet world. The few screens that make up the Boggly Woods are some of my favorite in the game. The lack of color, the luminous pattern on the ground, the eternal ochre sky. This chapter toys with the idea of mythical creatures from a far-off land with a society all their own. The idea of stumbling across a new world, being the only human aware of its existence. The game subtly asks if the player has experienced a story like this before, or imagined that such a world existed. Have you? The third chapter is all about becoming a celebrity, the want to become a professional athlete or performer, the desire to stand on stage victorious, soaking up the cheers of adoring fans. Who hasn't fantasized about becoming rich and famous? Who hasn't dreamed of playing a major league sport, or becoming a music superstar, or directing a blockbuster film? While this chapter reminds the player of a fantasy they might have had, it also contains a stark reminder. The entertainment industry is filled with shady characters and grim secrets. Are you sure you want to be the one that uncovers them? The fourth chapter is a horror story. It starts with the residents of Twilight Town getting turned into pigs, the dread of knowing that at any point a resident could lose their body, their autonomy, become something they're not. But midway through, the narrative shifts. Mario has broken the curse, the townsfolk are saved, yet it has cost him his name and face. He is nobody. This chapter references common fears, a fear of the dark, a fear of your friends leaving you, a fear of someone taking everything from you. a fear of screaming out for help yet not being heard. But this chapter also contains another experience, learning that someone who might have once been seen as an enemy can actually be seen as a friend. Like the other chapters, it takes these somewhat common ideas and builds upon them. Losing autonomy? Papier-mâché swine. A haunted house? A billion cute ghosts. Feeling helpless and unheard? Purple guy. Being a friend for someone who needs it? Who else but Vivian? The journey then proceeds to Keelhole Key, a dangerous haunted island, home to a legendary treasure. The crew gets shipwrecked, forced to live in a makeshift settlement with a leader nobody likes. It tells a story of pirates, curses, hidden treasure, the wild. But it also tells the story of grieving, the void a loved one leaves behind when they pass on. It's a common fantasy married to a universal pain. The next trip is much more luxurious, taking place on the Excess Express. This time, the genre shifts to a detective story, as something sinister is bound to happen on the 3-day voyage. It's a locked room mystery, complete with inspectors, imposters, and interrogations. Pennington is the detective on board, and while he might seem to be a stand-in for a famous literary sleuth, he's absolutely horrendous at his job. A common subversion of the trope, sure, but a subversion nonetheless. He, along with the passengers on the train, create a cast of suspects that the player will get to know on their journey to Poshley Heights. The 7th chapter flirts with the science fiction genre. The idea of blasting off into space from a giant cannon is something straight out of a Jules Verne or Georges Méliès story. It references the very foundation of the genre it riffs on. But once on the moon, the reference points move up to the latter half of the 20th century, with obvious nods to 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars. And these nods go beyond the average reference. I'm reminded of another scene towards the end of Conker's Bad Fur Day that references another science fiction touchstone, The Matrix. Conker and Barry don their sunglasses and black leather trench coats. They leap in slow motion, shooting their way through the stone atrium while heavy electronic music plays. It's a straightforward parody of a popular film. Conker's Bad Fur Day assumes that you know about The Matrix and its iconic scenes. And, well, yes, The Matrix has reached a level of cultural prevalence that just about everyone has at least a passing knowledge of it. If the player hasn't seen The Matrix, then this scene doesn't really work. But compare that to the Thousand Year Door's most overt reference, HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. That story features a computer personified with a single red light going rogue. It develops a dismissive attitude towards the living beings on board its spaceship. In The Thousand Year Door, Princess Peach befriends Tech, a sentient computer personified with a single light who goes rogue. But unlike HAL, Tech learns how to love. The reference to 2001 is a nice subversion, but if the player isn't familiar with the novel or the movie, Tech still works as a standalone character. Obviously, Conker's Bad Fur Day is going for a very different thing with its Matrix reference, but the underlying principle remains the same. One game parodies a reference, the other builds upon it. The Thousand Year Door contains an abundance of references to film franchises, to real-life celebrities, to popular characters. But the X-Nauts, Rock Hawk, and Pennington still work as characters, even if the player is unfamiliar with Star Wars, Dwayne Johnson, or Hercule Poirot. This is the Thousand Year Door's first layer of nostalgia. There's another advantage to the game's short story approach. The Thousand Year Door aims to capture childlike wonder, the sense of discovery that one gets when experiencing something for the first time. The wildly different situations the characters find themselves in cast a wide net of relatability. It gives the game the opportunity to hint at a vast array of once-new experiences. Maybe it's just me, but when playing through The Thousand Year Door, I'm reminded of things that once captivated me. Little things, mundane things, but moments that have stuck with me for ages. I remember as a young kid at recess, sitting by a tree and watching a group of ants scurry around in space. I stared at one point on the ground, letting all the ants come and go out of my field of vision. There were just so many of them, and they all lived under the tree. I remember my elementary school friends would gather at my friend's house over the summer. We would take turns on the trampoline performing pro wrestling moves on each other. I'm surprised no one got more hurt than they did. I remember being in a church sanctuary at night. The stained glass windows that filled the room with multicolored light were dark. It felt wrong. I remember going on a camping trip when it rained the entire weekend. Everyone's wet clothes and shoes and tents and belongings brought out the worst in each one of us. Except for one kid who was insistent on keeping a positive attitude. We all hated him. I remember a long trip to see my aunt and uncle who live several states away. I don't remember much of the actual visit, but I do have vivid memories of the trip there and back. Why is that? I remember sitting on the school bus with my notebook, wanting to create a new, epic, boundary-pushing sci-fi story. I would have plans for the whole book series and sprawling cast of characters, but I could never write more than a few pages. The next week, I would have a new plan for a new series, and the same thing a week after that, and the week after that. And I also remember going to the local library and realizing that I could check out more or less as many books as I wanted. I rummaged through the shelves and grabbed anything that looked interesting. Picture books, novels, biographies, scientific text about nature, comic strip collections, anything that caught my interest. I returned home with more books than I could carry. Of course I didn't read them all, but I did sit on the floor of my bedroom and thumb through them, admiring the illustrations and photographs, catching character descriptions, getting glimpses into different worlds. This is the Thousand Year Door's second layer of nostalgia. There's an infamous sequence in the Thousand Year Door dubbed The Search for General White. It's probably the game's biggest stumble. At the start of the 7th chapter, Mario and friends learn that a mysterious cannon in the Phrygian land of Far Outpost will be their ticket into outer space. But the locals won't help them unless they first get permission from the ultra-wealthy Goldbob and the cannon's former operator, General White. So the player is left to wander the world and try and find the missing Bob-ombs. Goldbob's location is easy to figure out. He and his family are in Poshley Heights, where we left them. But General White, however... General White is first seen in Petalburg, the village from the first chapter, but upon arriving in town, he's nowhere to be found. Speaking to the mayor reveals the rumor that General White went to some tropical place, and thus the goose chase begins. The player has to travel from Petalburg to Keyhall Key, to Glitzville, to the Great Tree, to Twilight Town, and then back to Far Outpost. In each place, Mario has just missed the general. This section of the game is tedious and honestly feels like padding. Why can't General White be, just like somewhere close by? The developers of the Thousand Year Door remake seem to agree about its tedium. The 2024 version of the game includes this handy warp room that allows the player to quickly jump from town to town. In the original game, the player had to physically backtrack to all of these places, so this quest is much less of a chore than it was in the GameCube original. But chore or not, this quest is vital to the Thousand Year Door's overarching theme of nostalgia, and it's where the game's attitude towards its theme changes. This sequence forces the player to revisit all the places they've been over the course of their adventure, and remember their experiences in these places. I remembered Koops' girlfriend not wanting him to leave. I remembered the shipwreck crew voting to make Flavio actually do something. I remember the crumb trail of clues left behind in the Glitzville Plaza. I remembered when our puny guide reunited with his imprisoned sister. I remember hiding under the shadow of a tree and listening to the birds speak. The game made me nostalgic for itself. And so begins the Thousand Year Door's third layer of nostalgia. As the Bob-ombs blast Mario off to the moon, the reminders of what came before continue. The X-Naut base will start to look familiar. The player will roam the same halls they did as an imprisoned princess. They'll have to participate in another out-of-left-field trivia contest. They will stand in the very rooms where the early cutscenes took place. The player returns to the Thousand Year Door, that tomb that they've returned to time and time again. And this time, they go inside. The pattern breaks, reaching its natural conclusion. And behind the door, stray strands of story come back around. A room fills with skeletons. A dragon vomits a star. The Shadow Sisters reveal their true intentions. The interludes with Bowser pay off. The X-Naut story reaches its end. And then, in its final moments, the Thousand Year Door performs its ultimate trick. As the shadows cover the land, the game once again reminds the player of where they've been, the characters they've met, the memories they've made. The game shows all these locales in distress. And when the final battle looks bleak, what else but a glimmer of hope? All the characters who have helped us along the way remember Mario. All the places he's been to, the people whose lives he has affected, they think of him. And the player is reminded once again of the places they've been, how this long journey is finally coming to an end. And once victorious, the audience is treated to an epilogue that, once again, shows the places Mario has been and the characters he's met, how their journey has changed them all for the better. The Thousand Year Door seals its theme of memory through repetition, a tried and true method of making sure something sticks in the audience's brain. It makes sure the player never forgets the journey that led them to this climactic moment. These are the three layers of nostalgia that the Thousand Year Door implements. It makes the player nostalgic for stories they probably have heard before. It simultaneously makes the player reflect on moments from their own life by incorporating grounded, relatable moments. and then it makes the player nostalgic for itself. It reminds the player of the original stories and characters inhabiting its world. And now there's a fourth layer of nostalgia too. As of this writing, the Thousand Year Door is over 20 years old. In those 2 decades, its reputation has grown. It's become something of a legend, a wonderful title that had never really been recognized by its publisher, an acclaimed adventure sealed away to the retro collecting market in the back alleys of the internet. Memories of Professor Frankly, Goombella, Flurry, Vivian, Bobbery, Crump, Tech, of Rogueport, Glitzville, Twilight Town, the XS Express, they've remained memories, their names never to be spoken again. And suddenly, the door opens. A new, shiny version of the Thousand Year Door releases to commemorate its 20th birthday. And while fans of the original jump for joy, it inevitably attracts a new set of fans. Players whose first exposure to the Thousand Year Door happens with a Switch controller in hand, instead of a Gamecube's. And the cycle continues. Who knows what we'll think of the Thousand Year Door 2 decades from now? Who knows what the world will look like? But it's comforting to know that we can always put on those rose-tinted glasses and remember the stories of our youth.